Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm Pasha. I'm part of the health education team. So last week we started a summer series with and we're doing series in summer about church architecture and space. So it's going to be like a series for those of you who might have missed last week. It's going to be a series of YouTube lessons put together by the Church of Saint Esprit in New York City. And then towards the end of the summer, we're gonna focus more on faith itself. So today, I had a few things to discuss.
Barbara, can I go back to
That's the what?
yeah.
So just for fun, before I get into the more substantive thing, I was thinking about how it's been the summer solstice and how traditionally like church architecture has given some thought sometimes to being oriented to the east. So I was just kind of curious. This is not very academic or anything, but I was just Googling around this today to see if there was that much to do with the summer solstice in terms of church architecture. Because like I said, I know that they're a little bit concerned sometimes about like being oriented to the east historically. So I was remembering that other places like Stonehenge have been kind of famous for these Neolithic structures that are built to capture like certain sun rays, particularly for like major points in the year, like the summer solstice. So when I was Googling, so this is Stonehenge. This would be full time. Oh, it's fine. It's okay. So it doesn't seem like, from what I found, was it necessarily like a deliberate thing over the centuries? So there are some churches that you can find where they apparently did have the summer solstice in mind in terms of where to put their church in this. But this is an example that I found of a church in, I think, Italy. And so this is apparently capturing what the church looks like as the summer solstice sun rays come through. There's a few other examples that I can find, but I don't know, it's just on my mind since it's been June 21st and it's a long stay here, so I'm kind of gonna start with that. Moving on to the topic of the day, the YouTube lesson that I'm focusing on is about church architecture vocabulary, and I went ahead and listened to the talk and then decided it might be fun to kick off with a quiz just to see what we all kind of were familiar with going in. And so I thought we could just spend a few minutes, you can work on it on your own, you can work on it with your partner, and your buddy sitting next to you. Yeah, so it's just a matching quiz, so it's, like, just look for A, just like which number goes with that. So you can draw a line, you can write the number in. And then at the end, after a few minutes, I'll go through it. And this is me trying to do my best to listen to the speaker. This isn't like authoritative or anything. But after you go through this and listen to the lecture about church architecture terms.
Watching.
Yeah. Yeah. This is challenging. You said that. You were good. Yeah, so this had something to nuance. Yeah. Okay, you know what? Oh, that's right, these little help to come. Stop it. I don't wanna run conversation.
See. I think so. Watch engineering exam I had, say he's all. The other one o'clock. No, I was looking at the favorite is. Oh, so we both.
No phones, no phone.
No respect.
I'm gonna collect up everyone's phones. Just sort of take your paper down there.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for giving me there. So this terminology that's covered in the YouTube lesson, and I ended up distributing selections to show today, so it's not time to have discussion and the whole lesson, but this is what's covered in that YouTube lesson, if anyone wants to go back and listen to the whole thing, so I'll just go through now the answer key, and again, like this is me listening to it. Like when you listen to the whole lesson, there's like a lot of caveats, and there's a whole lot of like throwable discussion and so there's a lot of nuance that's hard to capture in this. But so first one is A cathedral is 11. Church of the senior bishop with bishops serving in the front. B pro cathedral is number 8. Paris Church used temporarily as a cathedral. C pro cathedral is 10. Church that was formerly a cathedral. D basilica 15. Style of the building. Large central nave with 2 side apses with special ceremonial privileges. E minster is number 12. Large or important church cathedral, perhaps attached to a monastery. F church, number 6, denominational term for a place of worship, possibly from Greek. Oikia. G chapel, number 14, place of prayer inside larger church or building, or non-conformist place of worship. H, temple is number 3, place of worship, term often used by minority denominations. I, oratory, is number 5, private chapel. J, a shrine, number 13, holy place dedicated to Saint or martyr. K, sanctuary. 7, sacred space around an altar, aka chancel. L, monastery. Number 1 or more monks or nuns live a secluded life, also known as a nunnery. And convent. Number 9, community of priests and lay brothers for people who need aka a priory. And abbey, number 2, complex of planned buildings used by a religious order led by abbess. And O, priory. Number 4, satellite house of an abbey for a prior or prior house. 6. So there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of detail that goes into this. So without further ado, I'm gonna structure it a little bit differently than last week, so we'll have basically 10 minutes of video and then some discussion, and then 10 minutes of video and then some discussion if there's time, okay?
Word church, because this is the word that's most commonly used for a building that's used for Christian worship. Now, it can be anything from a house church to a lodge, elaborate building in a city or a village, like we have here in the Church of Madeleine in Paris. The word never really refers to an architectural style, the word church. Although in our quiz, in a little bit, we're going to ask ourselves two important questions. And one of them is, does this building look like a church? So we've probably got some vague idea in our minds about what a church should look like, although that might not be quite as clear as we imagine. This word also has a slight denomination significance. Catholics and Anglicans are happy to use the word church, as are Methodists and Presbyterians, some Baptists, although often some non-conformist churches refer to themselves as chapels rather than churches. So a church essentially refers to what goes on inside a particular building and the people who are involved in that particular building, rather than designating a particular style of architecture. So here we go. This is just as much of a church as Madeleine. It just happens to be meeting in a house, so it's called a house church. You can see the architecture isn't grand, but it's very welcoming and it's doing the job for this group of people who are gathered here. This is the Church of St. Simon Stylites in Aleppo in Syria, and it's one of the oldest surviving church buildings in the world. You see a wide variety of church styles that are built. The word, incidentally, was a rather fancy church here in the Sebastian's Basilica Church in Cologne, which began construction in 1916. The word church itself comes from the Old English kirke, or kirk, meaning a place of assembly that's used for Christian worship. We here still in Scotland, churches being referred to as kirk. It may come from the Greek word, the Greek expression, kyriaki oikia, which means the Lord's house, kyriaki, of the Lord, kyrie, and oikia meaning house. It sort of transferred itself via the Gothic language into the pronounced church, because kyriaki oikia might be a bit tricky for the Gothics to pronounce. And of course, Eglise comes from the Greek ecclesia via the Latin. Now, a chapel is a bit more difficult to define in a church. It usually designates a Christian place of prayer that's quite small. They're often inside of a larger church or a larger cathedral, and they will have their own altar, sometimes their own relics. So a laity chapel, you can see here, is a small chapel attached to a larger church. It's sometimes behind the high altar, It's the largest, the most important chapel, the series of chapels around an ambulatory situated at the far east end of the church, the Lady Chapel being dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Some churches, some cathedrals have lots and lots of chapels, and we'll discover how that happened in the next few weeks. A chapel can also be a space dedicated for worship inside a larger institution, a secular institution even, like a school or a prison or a hospital. An aristocratic house can have a chapel. I'm sure that Buckingham Palace has a chapel inside it, for instance. There are chapels in funeral homes, in cemeteries. They're sometimes called a chapel of ease. A chapel of ease can also be a wayside chapel that's off the beaten track in a remote area where worship isn't regularly celebrated. In these pictures we're going to see here that there are many chapels around this absent maps of the Notre Dame de Montcorneveur in Saint-Nectaire, in the Dôme in France. You see this normally and the Romanesque cathedral designates or indicates those on the outside that there are many chapels sticking out from the high altar behind this one, normally the Lady Chapel. Here we have a chapel in a hospital, which contains nice comfortable seating for those who are ill, disabled access here, comfortable and cozy and suitable for purpose. It's a hospital chapel. Here we can see two contrasting airport chapels. No guesses, no prizes if you guess which one is French. On the left-hand side there we see the airport chapel in Charlesbourg. On the right-hand side we've got Washington Dulles chapel there, which looks almost as if you've already checked in. Here we have the Wayside Chapel. There's no priest or minister associated with this building. It's just for people to wander in, as the sign says, and say a little prayer if you would like to. Chapels of ease were sometimes quite grand. They're called chapels of ease because some big churches in parishes were very difficult to get to. At certain times of year, the fields might have been flooded, there might have been the heights of difficult conditions, or might have been an extremely long way away. So they made chapels of ease, which weren't parish chapels, they were chapels that were built for the ease of those who wanted to go to church but couldn't make it all the way to the parish church. Now, this is St. Nicholas Chapel in King's Lynn. It's the largest chapel of these in England. As you see, they're not always small, they can be big enough to accommodate quite a number of people.
A Swiss engineer might have just solved one of the biggest problems with air conditioning, and big AC companies are not happy about it.
Now, another way in which this word chapel is used is by independent denominations like the wee free churches of Scotland or small places of worship in Wales. They use the word chapel instead of church to designate a place of worship. So this is saying a chapel, Bethel Chapel, various other names that are applied to these places of worship in non-conformist churches. They have no particular architectural form, these chapels, and sometimes if they're interdenominational, they won't have a specific decoration that's associated with a certain denomination, like a crucifix or statues, and sometimes they may be called meditation rooms as opposed to chapels. Here's a Methodist chapel, so you can see that the word chapel can also be applied to a Methodist church as opposed to Methodist church. They want to call themselves Methodist chapel, so there's some fluidity in the way this word is used. And here's a wonderful chapel in Antarctica, St. Hyland Rilski, a small church, chapel of ease. It's the southernmost Greek Orthodox religious building in the world. Here's the chapel in the wood, Strawberry Hill, rather a fanciful looking thing. in London, and underneath here we have Callaway Gardens Mountain Resort Chapel in Georgia, open at certain times of year for the use of the people who are on holiday at this Callaway Gardens Mountain Resort. Technically, an oratory
Okay, so those first two clips were about discussing the term church and discussing the term chapel, which are delivered by the most common phrases for religious buildings in Christianity. So I thought we'd start there. And I think if you look at the other side of your quiz, and I'll find the discussion questions, and there's a couple questions to deal with those two clips that I just showed. So I think we've got about 9 minutes time to discuss this group, and then we'll move on to the next set of clips from the lesson. Thanks.
Yeah, so the film was seen. Are we ever mild? And people are loving all that. Feeling. I go to a final.
European church. School church. Very, I do even St. Michael's. It was. I think it's St. Jason's.
It's not about this church. Literally,
They have a stronger. There's a lot of it. Little building.
front of the church. And I think that you have like house, like.
What are them? Yeah. Oh, so I'm thinking of going down there. Chapel. It's all stuff.
Took the last day left, just to do.
Really.
The page.
What is that? It's a little bit of that, because it's an actual church. Yeah, they have, they're. You can read that book. I think they can go around seven. Sorry. So it's just read that all the time.
I mean, I don't know, he's like, trying to go back, like, I must stay, I was be able to see that our flags are actually, sorry. Wow, lots of nice, and it's just like, yeah, I think I've seen the movie, right? So much. Like, I was looking late, back to the I see a lot of different stuff just coming to me. To me, it's like mine, how we find our sex and sex, like. My work, like, I agree now, I mean, that one of them striking to me too, especially. Because I just saw something stick. I was thinking that I am. When I said, you know, it's super. Something about, and then it's built, it's an adult thing. It's narrow, and express everything on has been service and there, and you don't start down, it's But it's like, it's the thing about, so a lot of people in journalism, like, maybe. Very close, something who's got, not something like that, it's like, and it's very, like, so about, yeah, outside of, right? And then also just the fact that we see stuff, and they heard that, so my neighbor, that's. That's the year. I think it's sort of, there's something sort of, somebody's kind of, sort of, yeah, and again, actually, or like, I don't know. Like, it wasn't the same. Oh, yeah. Years ago, I appreciate you. How I am. So, oh, yeah.
Those are one of those bad things that my dad's not interested in. They consider to that, so no, he's in my. Asian countries, and
on board for a long time.
So you've already set up for the business, right? I don't know.
And this is another line built in, if I might even build something in commercial, it's staying on us, you know, we're not like little. It's another thing, but it's so many screen. Yeah. It's like, can you really, what about if you buy there, a lot of things, lower latency, really was area, you know, there's one, there's a business. Yeah. Like, what's the, you want to standards, you know, today. Census right. They're not like, we're talking about. But cars, the shape of our roof. And I don't know if that's. Originally, I see that. Trump's not fell there, but I don't know. That's yeah. If you look at it from the outside, if I can put my business, I have to start worrying. Yeah, it's like. And this is not, yeah, they're not, that group is very. You need water, yes, there's good. You need to get. Yeah, the greatest thing. I'm sure it's not. And she's. Well, are you on one? So that's the second thing. But I have to go back to that video. So. We weren't even.
Oh.
Zero to so move on after discussion about church and chapel and the next two videos I think are about cathedrals and basilicas. And then we'll have some discussion after that.
True story.
I'll tell you that. Well, read for maybe on. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't.
Yes, which is a cathedral. A cathedral is a church that is the seat or cathedra, as you can see, of the bishop. And you can take this quite literally. Cathedrals always have a bishop's throne somewhere in front of the building. And that throne doesn't just symbolize the bishop's spiritual authority, it also indicates the seat of a rhetor or teacher, in Greek, Latin teacher. And it also conjures up thoughts of the seat of a magistrate in the Roman world. So this seat here at front of the church has spiritual authority, it has teaching authority, and it has legal authority in a community. This is the cathedral of the Pope when he's acting as Bishop of Rome. This is the Bishop of Rome's Cathedral in the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran, which is one of the four major basilicas in Rome. We'll discover what the major basilicas are in a moment. Now, cathedrals are very specific to denominations that have bishops. That is to say, Catholic churches, Eastern Orthodox churches, Anglican churches, some Lutheran churches, among others. Now, because they became the most important church in the diocese, they also housed the institutions of the diocese. The diocese doesn't come just with the church, it comes with the chapter or the committee of canons, who meet regularly in a specially disciplined chapter house, which an ordinary church would never have. Some of them have separate baptistries, a bishop's palace, together with associated buildings for cathedral staff, especially the cathedral at some point in its history was associated with a monastery. Here are another couple of chairs. Here's the chair of St. Peter, here in Rome. It's all covered in gilt now, but underneath this is a small wooden stool, or moth-eaten apparently, when it was last looked at in the 700s, I believe. But it was dated for a rather later period, still, nevertheless, there it is. The literal chair of Peter in the Basilica in Rome, the first bishop. On the second picture here, you can see the bishop's cathedral in Exeter Cathedral in the United Kingdom, clearly a special place to sit. And in this building, you can see Salisbury Cathedral. You could tell it's a cathedral from this shot in the air, because here we have a chapter house where a group of canons would meet to discuss the events at the cathedral and around about some associated buildings, including cloister. In this particular picture of the bishop's palace in Albi, in southern France, you see the cathedral dominating the skyline, and down here we can see the bishop's palace and the residence of the various officials of the diocese, who would also be given some accommodation in the surrounding area of the cathedral. And here is our own cathedral in the city, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. Here's the cathedral itself, and surrounding it you have a school, you have the ceremony house, the bishop's residence, the dean's residence, the cathedral offices, and a large meeting room down here on this side. Now, cathedrals may not necessarily be terribly grand buildings. Some parish churches are more impressive architecturally than some cathedrals. But then cathedrals are, in fact, the most imposing buildings, perhaps one of the most ancient buildings in the town they're associated with. Here you can see St. Asaph's Cathedral in Wales. It's seat of the Bishop of the Diocese of Asaph, founded in 550, but as you can see, it looks more like a modest parish church. It doesn't look like one of those grand cathedrals that perhaps we'll be looking at in a little while.
I wear it for golf, to the office, I wear it everywhere. Hey guys, this is Joe, the founder of Fiore, and I'm here today to talk about one of my personal favorites, the Meta Pan.
Here in this picture, you can see this is the ruins of 5th century basilica which are like in Syria, and gives you a good idea of the day owns what basilica is. A basilica usually refers to the style of a building rather than what a building is used for. Although many important ancient churches, cathedrals, are built in the basilica style. So a church can be a basilica and a cathedral at the same time. Originally, they were ancient Roman public buildings. They were the site where trials and courts were held. They were the places where public functions were celebrated. They're all barn-like buildings, as you can see here. with a central nave down the middle, high, and two side aisles a little lower. Some ancient Roman basilicas were actually converted into churches, and even their columns and their walls were reused as a part of the cathedral. In fact, this was the earliest form that large Christian churches took after Constantine's legalization of Christianity. And in the Roman Catholic Church today, a basilica is a term applied to a very large church building that's going to be suitable for big ceremonial gatherings. We'll see here why that is the case. This is a basilica dating from about 310 AD, so just before the legalization of Christianity. It was actually built by Emperor Constantine, and before it became a church, it was used for secular purposes. Constantine, his officials would sit up here, was used for the audience of foreign ambassadors, for instance, who would come down this long aisle and present their credentials and their pleas to the Emperor Constantine at the front, who was repurposed as a site of Christian worship. So you can see its original design was supposed to be for great ceremonial occasions, so it adapted itself very nicely to a church that could be used for great ceremonial processions with the bishop and the acolytes and the priests and the deacons, the ones that have you. This is the Basilica of Santa Sabina in Rome. And here we can see the columns you can see running down by the side of the nave, or in fact repurposed from the temple of Juno Regina. So it's a basilica form of church with a high roof and two lower side aisles. I mentioned that there are four major basilicas in Rome, and about 1,800 official lesser basilicas scattered all over the world have been named basilicas for one reason or another. A basilica doesn't just have to be built in a certain style like this. They also given permission to use fancy things in their processions and services to make them look a little bit more grand. They're allowed to have an umbrella over the person who's presiding, fancy silk umbrella. They're allowed to carry bells in processions. The people in procession are allowed to wear a little cape, and fancy cape over the top of their vestments if they're important clergy who are present. Here's St. John in the Lateran, one of Rome's major four basilicas. Once again, you see the basilica style and the fact that it's been designated as one of the official four basilicas in Rome, including the Basilica of St. Peter in Vatican itself.
Okay, well, that was a little overview of cathedrals and basilicas, which are also software for this commonly known phrases like the video today. So that's why I'm saying I had these sections of the lesson. So there's a few questions for discussion. It's 9:50 right now, so I think we can see if we're probably here until 10. If people can take off and think to help with the service, but otherwise, just about 10 minutes of discussion left. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's not as a church.
I think it's one of those really big US Westminster, absolutely correct. I said this is that's such an advocate.
Like, I guess historically, like, and you call it,
I mean, it's useful to have for all these different things, and there's probably like a few lessons made on some clear. But I don't think that's risk. Most people
It's when they got closer to the name of the comprehensive because commission actually are part. But later, that's what the very exciting.
You would say, that's like, into a facility, it's like, I think several hospitals, the facility, yes, because the cathedral is a church. Probably not.
What's all question?
Yeah.
That's the word.
I was just going to choose, but.
In
Just like.
Roman Catholic Church, I think, like,
I thought it had to be something with the-
Roman Catholic, like, they were, yeah, he's a large example. They're not here. Hey, it's out there, it's like, there's probably a part of forgotten.
Yeah.
Gaming and cat. So a lot of times it's.
A lot of times, like, I said, it's all like, spend time with my family.
Let's
No, it's St. Paul is a state tax a little bit. It's always had like tradition happening. So clerks and you'll see they goes actually higher. And so you spend your grandparents and she's right. We just had to maybe we start.
No, see, maybe I just have to do state has to have.
Oh, no, that like it's really interesting. I think it's like it's last a lot of ashes, I think. Like,
Right.
I do. So it was just like, ask what you're, very inspired. Like, yeah. So she's like very traditional. Yeah. So not about the understanding there. Something that they just stay on.
No, they will be useful to like. The same kind of, yeah, because there's people designated where the head of the diocese is. Just love everything. Yeah.
That's a little story. It's just that.
Next time you back those. Example.
The dice is out you, basically what was. That's part of what we're doing. This said it,
But I think, yeah. He's there, one of these videos, so he has questions. Yeah. This so that's the thing about this, yeah, this stone building, gray and.
Plans
And
for.
our-